The parable of the mustard seed, Matthew 13, verses 31 and 32. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches.
Hello and welcome to 4 Weeks of Mission again. This is week 2 and it's good to be back with you. I thought I'd start today by telling you a little bit about my family. I think it's really important to kind of know your whakapapa, and I think it does help to connect people to each other. And so I mentioned in the last video that I kind of grew up overseas in Cambodia, but of course that started with my parents have growing and being given a real passion for mission. But let's rewind a little bit further. My dad, he grew up in Rangiora, and you actually recognize him a little bit because he's actually in the B-roll footage we've used for this series of shoveling dirt and planting seeds, and yeah, so that's my dad. So that's been really cool to have him part of this, and so he became a Christian when he was around 19 or 20 years old. Got radically saved. Him and Mum got married. Mum was a faithful follower of Christ, and they were led to do missions in Papua New Guinea for over a decade, really. And then they were pastors, and for probably 20, 30 years, they were kind of credentialed as pastors, and they were involved in helping to lead multiple churches. And when I was 13, we moved to Cambodia, and so they took us to Cambodia. They got the itch to serve again after pastoring in New Zealand, and we were there for a while. I've had 5 kids. I'm one of 5, and now they have 13 grandchildren. And in some way, shape, or form, by the grace of God, we're all serving God and having impact in various ways. And it's just incredible when you start to really think about what kind of Dad's life and Mum's life has kind of turned into, where it was a young kind of Rangiora boy, and then God called him. The part of Dad's story that always amazes me is that he had a great grandmother. She did have a faith, and no doubt in Dad's mind that she would have prayed for her grandchildren and great grandchildren and descendants. And there's kind of this idea of this seed of faith that's kind of been passed down from one generation to the other, and until Dad became a Christian when he was 19, 20 years old, and he really credits that there was just a line of prayer. Oftentimes we can think of faith and the kingdom of God as the bigness, and we can kind of see a story like Dad's and see all the fruit that God has grown in his life, and now the impact that his kids are having, and one day we all believe his grandchildren will have as they grow. And we can kind of see, wow, that's the kingdom of God. But when we read stories like the parable of the mustard seed, actually Jesus kind of starts to flip that on his head a little bit, doesn't he? And he starts to explain to us that the kingdom of God often starts small. I mean, we can even go back in our history in New Zealand. I mean, now Christianity is grown across New Zealand, and I wouldn't say we're a Christian nation, but there are so many churches and churches and are full of disciples of Jesus who really love Jesus, and we've had an impact on the community. And you kind of look in our history and you go back hundreds of years, and that all started with the first missionaries coming to New Zealand, and it was hard work. And the first missionaries that came here didn't see fruit of the gospel growing for years. It started small, didn't it? Here in New Zealand, the gospel. It started with a small act of faith from those people, and they just planted what they had, and now you see what Christianity is in this nation. But let's go back even further. You kind of think of the very origins of Christianity. And you look at the church, the global church, and how over the last 2,000 years it's spread throughout this world and has had incredible impact on history and society and culture and the value systems of those cultures all over the world. But where did Christianity begin? It began with a man named Jesus, the God who became flesh. And by the mystery of mysteries, God decided to come into the world as a vulnerable baby. Not even recognized by other people for years. It started small, like a mustard seed. When we kind of think and engage with the global church and we hear stories of how disciples of Jesus and other cultures and communities are serving God, sometimes we can be distracted by the bigness and by the big fruit. But the reality is that those people who are serving and bringing the kingdom of God to earth, they're just working with the faith that God has given them, the small seeds, and they're planting those. And those small acts of faith everywhere, all over the world, turn into something big. What I love about this parable is that it talks about the mustard seed growing into the largest tree in the garden. And the tree gets so large and so strong that birds come and rest and make their home there. Isn't that a beautiful picture? That even if our faith is small, that if we act on it, that can grow into something so strong and have such a sense of safety and such a sense of firmness that others might find their place of belonging. And Jesus says that is the kingdom of God. That if you are willing to plant what you have, the small faith that you have, and even if you think that it's insignificant, I can use it to have an incredible impact in the world. The story and history of global missions, as I've just shared, the impact it's had on my life because of my dad, and then on New Zealand because of the missionaries that came here, and then the world because Jesus came to this place, it all started small. What an incredible thing that we can learn from the story of missions in the world. So like we did last week, we're just going to pause here for a second and go overseas to hear some stories from our mission partners. I'll be back with some questions to finish up this week.
Hi, we are Luke and Naomi Sinclair. We're here in Tokyo, Japan, working with KGK, a Christian University student organisation. And here in Japan, Christianity feels like a mustard seed. Less than 1% of the population adheres to Christianity.
And there are historical reasons for this. Christian missionaries first arrived in the 16th century, but soon afterwards, Japan blocked off all access to colonial powers, and there was a government effort to systematically eradicate Christianity. This was very effective. People who were Christian were forced to recant their faith, and many of them were martyred. Now, there were some who secretly continued to stay Christian, but these Christians had no access to Bibles, no access to pastors, or any support from the outside.
But finally, in the 19th century, Japan was forced to open up its borders again, and trade and Christian missionaries were finally allowed to come in. And it was during that time that New Zealand CMS was formed and sent its very first missionary, Marie Paisley, to Japan, where she came and worked with education and was sharing her faith.
Christianity started to flourish again, but then World War II. And during World War II, many churches chose to honour the emperor above God, some even including hymns to the emperor during their church services. Once again, Christianity was pushed to the margins, and Shinto, which is an animistic religion, took centre stage.
After World War II though, Japan developed a new constitution which protected the freedom of religion. So since that time, many missionaries, including us, were able to come here to Japan. But yet, Christianity is still perceived as a Western religion, as a minority religion. In our apartment, you'll often see posters advertising the local Shinto shrine or the Buddhist shrine, their activities, but a Christian poster will never really be permitted.
So 100 years since the borders have been opened, Christianity in Japan is still small, like a mustard seed. In fact, most people that we meet here, they tell us, "You're the first Christian I've ever met." And we'll ask high school students, "Is there another Christian at your school?" And most times they'd say, "No." Now statistically there probably would be someone, but there's no chance for them to connect.
Yeah, so Christianity really does feel small, like a mustard seed, but at the same time, it's still growing. So we work with KGK, it's a Christian student group. Every summer in August they hold these camps. This year there's over 20 students exploring Christianity coming along to these camps. And we're seeing students really grow in their boldness to share their faith. They're getting over the hurdle of them worried about other students thinking they're weird for believing in a minority religion, and we're seeing real growth.
So how can we keep trusting God when there's so few Christians here and when so many people don't have any idea who Jesus is? Well, we keep trusting God because we're confident that Jesus is good news. So many people here struggle with feelings of low self-esteem. There's family fractures, there's hollow materialism, and there's this yearning for something beyond death. Wouldn't it be amazing if people here in Japan knew about Jesus and the love and the security and the hope that he brings? And so that's why we keep sharing Jesus, but also we're encouraging students to keep sharing Jesus. Because the kingdom of God is not just true, it's also good.
And Jesus promised in this parable, it may be small, but it is going to grow. And we don't know God's timing. I mean, we've just seen the history of Japan, it's very long, and will things happen in our lifetime? We don't know. But Jesus' promise is going to grow, and we know he always keeps his promises. And so we're going to keep going.
So I have some questions for you. What stories from the global church have you heard? How are you using the faith that God has already given you? Because we can kind of think of these big kind of figures of faith and look at our history, or even look at friends and family and kind of think, man, I wish I had faith like theirs, or I wish I was like them. But the truth is that we can only use what God has given us, and I can promise you, he has given you faith for something. Even if it's small, even if you have doubts, or even if you think it won't have any impact, I encourage you, how can you use what God has given you? I think one of the biggest things we can learn from this parable, and as we think about serving God and his kingdom, and what we can learn from how we see the global church serving, is that faith is actually more to do with believing God could use us and the small things that we have. It's in trusting in his power and not in our own power. It's trusting that he can make the small things that we have and he can use them for big impact. See you next week.